it was a little harder. So I did this. So, for instance, I converted today's lecture into a YouTube at the bottom of the blackboard. So this was the advanced anatomy lecture, the date. So you can just click on that and re-listen to that as a YouTube if you want. Okay. Same thing I'm doing for this now. I flick that switch to make sure it doesn't. That's like if nobody logs on, it shuts down kind of a switch. Which brings us to today's program. At least one, maybe one and a half things that are there. It involves PowerPoint 1B, which is the first anatomical. Lab is about the anatomy, much more than the physiology. Next term, if you're doing the advanced physics, most of you are, then we do a lot. We really focus on the physiological aspects of it. I have some very good technology that we're going to use. It's not really relevant now until we start getting the nervous system, and I'll probably crank it up then as a demo. It's called the iWork system. It's kind of fun. It doesn't work so good in this room with that horrible vibration. So, the trouble is, it's very hard for me. What I'd like to do is the environmental science lab, or see if at 3 o'clock we can get one of these other classrooms to tinker with it. Okay, so I'll check with Dr. Badger about that. So we're doing 1B, and we'll probably start this other one 4A, which is on that week one of the blackboard. So the first part here is, look, just like I was giving you osteotomies and osteectomies and nephrectomies and all that kind of good stuff. Okay, there's a whole language in lab that's part of it too. And so that's where we have to get into this. And everything, whenever you talk about anatomy, whether it's my dog or my cat, and many of you I'm sure have pets too, like mine, but because yours probably listens, mine does not, is that you have everything is in reference to what's called the anatomical position. So we start with that. You have to have a reference point. So any question I ask you about anatomy, let's start with this. What's the anatomical position of my dog or my cat? It's on all fours, which I'm not going to do. I would not be able to get up. It's not funny. She makes me do everything.
Your cat or your wife?
My wife. The cat I have to listen to. The cat, both cats and the dog are male. So she's in charge. And the cats are after that. Cats rule here. So the anatomical position is facing forward. It doesn't be an attention around the military. Okay. Your feet evenly spread about shoulder width. Toes, and this is where a lot of the illustrations illustrate like this. This is called abductive, pronounced abductive. Okay. Like sitting out, spread out like that. Not. Should be toes pointing straight ahead. Palms are not on your side, palms face forward. Okay. There are two positions for your hands. This is called supine, palms forward. This is pros, palms down. It's like when you say someone is in a prone position, they're lying face down, round or dead. Someone who's supine, it's like an operating room. You start, everybody's on supine. They're back. And if you have to flip somebody, that's a different story if you have to arrest someone. More on that down the road, anesthesia. That's everything is in reference to that. So when you ask the question, if this is your belly button, where's your belly button? Is it superior or inferior? Is it up top? In reference to what? Superior to my nose, but superior to my toes. So inevitably, you're going to see questions have to be phrased in such a way that you have reference points. And the overall reference point is the anatomical position. Moreover, we're going to be able to divide the body based on a series of planes. So planes, just like good old geometry planes, you're dealing with an infinite flat surface. And there are three of them. They can vary depending on how much you are. For students who go into imaging and radiology or things like that, it's very, very significant. So you have three planes. One is a vertical plane. It's called the sagittal plane. For our purposes, we won't try to take it in sections like this. This is called mid-sagittal. For us, we just do sagittal. So it's a vertical plane that runs in this direction, basically dividing into what? Right and left. There's another vertical plane that runs tangentially or at right angles to it that goes, if you will, from side to side. And you can move it up, you can move it down, I'll tell you more about that afterwards. But right about here, okay, this is called the frontal plane. This is divided into this from front to back. And you're going to learn there's more than just front to back. There's anterior and posterior, okay? And depending, like we're talking about the dog and cat, same kind of thing, running a little bit differently. It divides into ventral, belly, dorsal, back. When we get to the nervous system, which is the first system to be discussed anatomically. I've done this a lot. I did this on my memory, on my first day, hung over, hung out, everything. From memory. I've been living this for 50 years. You heard it. That 50, that 55th. Look at that old. You have a wonderful expression in Yiddish. I don't have to explain what it means because it's great to use it. It's called kissing your tuchs. I don't want to tell you what it means. So, you know what a tuchs is? The tush, the back of the front, fleshy part, your derriere, permanent vertical smile, famed in song and story, your buttocks. I've heard of it. Tuchs. Kashmir is, and you know, Kashmir. You'll always do that, you know, 8. You know, 10. You know, it'll be okay. It will. Go ahead. Smile, man. The last one of these planes is this one. It's a transverse plane rather than being vertical or horizontal. That's the classic cross-sectional plane. So typically it is here. And so you're going to see that divide and roughly it's at the level of the abilities. So we'll start with that. That's really the basis of anatomy to start with. So everything stems from that. The feet are slightly apart, palms forward. We'll talk more about supine, and there's muscles that do this. So when you talk about, and it has different meanings in the lower extremity, prone and supine have a different meaning, it has to do with your feet. So directional terms describe one body structure has to be in relation to another based on standard anatomical position. We view it in terms to the body being viewed, not the right or left of the observer. So if I'm pointing over here, as you're looking at me, it may be on your left, but it is my right. So we're always talking about that. Pretty obvious. So voila, I gave you a couple of these. Superior and inferior. Those are the common terms. In the nervous system, we use a lot of cranial and caudal. That's like head to tail. So think of that, the dog or the cat on all fours, they use a lot of cranial because they're not superior and inferior, they're on all fours. So your directionality runs more this way than the other way. We do use about this, so you're going to hear about that. When we get to the nervous system, you're going to hear about the cranial, not the cranial, the peripheral nerves that come off after the end of the spinal cord. They're called the cauda equina, horse's tail. So caudal gets from that. Cranial, just that. Okay, so anterior, ventral, toward the belly, or front, anterior is most commonly used. Dorsal, in the back. So you can see where the directionality is. And so it's always, again, the navel, belly button, umbilicus, whatever you want to call it. Inferior to the chin, I guess. When we talk about things with regard, the midline is here, obviously. Like, remember that sagittal plane. So medial toward the midline. Lateral away from the midline. So I love, it's the greatest time in the world to teach anatomy and bones. And I love doing it in this because we have sports seasons, football starts up, college, pro, injuries galore. Every injury you can imagine. And they always come early in the season or late in the season, early in the game or late in the game. So what do we hear ad nauseum? Things just happen to show Otani, not just happened, but just recently diagnosed, if they confirm it, ulnar collateral ligament. Ulnar is on, this is your ulnar side, sometimes you use the name of the bone. So in your forearm, you have two bones, radius and ulna. This is the ulnar aspect. So collateral, co and lateral, that implies either side. Every joint of every long bone, and we'll get to that, have collateral ligaments. On your knee, they're on either side. You have medial and lateral, or tibial and fibular. They're commonly injured. You have cruciate ligaments, anterior and posterior, okay, because of the way the directionality that they run in. They get the cruciate because they crisscross, okay? So the naming has, and so we see a lot of that anatomically. There's a lot of applications. When we start looking at the skeleton, you'll be able to see the predictability of the instability of the shoulder and the stability of the hip, based on the anatomical design of this, for lack of a better term, the socket. They're ball and socket joints. The hip, it's got a socket. That's that's a round circular structure sitting in a deep socket. Shoulders like this, it's inherently unstable. So you learn a lot about those types of things. And there's a wonderful thing about anatomy. We trade stability and instability. Instability or lack of stability gives us mobility. For stability, security. So we need these for walking, for posture, to support ourselves. These, we interact with the environment. Wide ranges of motion. So medial toward the midline. So I have my forearm and my abdomen. Which one is more toward the midline? My abdomen. Okay, or the outer aspect of my abdomen, whatever you want to phrase it. Medial, lateral. You have to be careful with anatomical position because of your hands. So your thumb, most people think, well, my thumb's toward the midline. Not the anatomical position. Your thumb's lateral, the big toe. They even have their own names. Thumb is called the pollex. That's the animal. Why? I just repeat it. Pollex, H-A-L-L, it's the big toe. I didn't name it. Every so often they change names. Intermediate, as you might guess, is in between. So you'll see when we're talking about, somebody just ruptured one, is out for the season. Quadriceps tendon. Okay, football. That's up here. I've seen them. What happened is there's quadriceps, 4 heads. You have 4 muscles. Rectus femoris, from here to here, is the only one that covers the hip. Think of it doing this, flexing the hip, flexing the knee. You have the quadriceps, you have the rectus femoris. Rectus means straight over the femur, your thigh. And you have vast muscles. There's their name, vastus. Huge. Vastus medialis, vastus lateralis, vastus intermedius. They all come together as one and form a conjoined tendon called the quadriceps tendon. Within that tendon is the patella, your kneecap, and the fibers going from the kneecap to where it eventually inserts here in your tibia, anteriorly on what's called the tibial tuberosity, a rounded portion of bone. Okay, it's the very famous patellar tendon, knee joint. So the terms are used a lot. Proximal, when it comes to extremities, close to the torso, away. Proximal, closest to the torso, or closest to the starting point. When we do kidney, you're going to hear about very, very famous structures where effectively what becomes the urine is being processed. It starts as filtrated, ends up as urine. There are proximal convoluted tubules and distal. So close to the starting point, proximal, or closest to the torso. Distal, farthest away. Use those terms all the time. Okay, to the surface, superficial, on the surface. Deep, so you think of somebody who's very superficial and somebody who's very deep. Or external and internal, they're somewhat self-explanatory. These are all relevant when you look at it. These are really critical terms for anatomy to understand. To be fair, the anatomy part of this two-course sequence has much more memorization. The physiology is much more about comprehension. Okay, to be fair. Some people are blessed with a really good memory, some are not. I find the best way, and the way your memory works, is to compartmentalize things. We start here. Axial, your core. So all the people work out, I'm doing my core today, I'm having a leg day, I have children who tell me this. I have a daughter who gets up at 5:30 in the morning to work out before she goes to bed. I know. I know. I have a son who's now 40, who's run 6 or 7 marathons. Where are you going? He started in downtown Pittsburgh 3 different times. He ended up back in the same place. What the hell are you doing? My daughter did half of that. I know she's different. I mean, she's got one Aurora Morris connection. She's engaged to a 2005 graduate of Aurora Morris. So she's like many of my children, engaged for long periods of time. 3 years. You don't believe me? 3 years. Sooner or later, she'll get married. She's only 37. Nevertheless, where did I start with? I got off on a tangent with memorizing things. So if you're going to be, some people are very lucky. I mean, I can look at that, maybe not as good as I could 30 or 40 or 50 years ago, and memorize that. I have near photographic memory for images. Very useful in medical school. Very useful. But I can memorize a lot of those things. Not everybody can do that. I don't like this because it's too busy graphically. So we can get these without all the names and just have the torso, and you can put in your own name. If you can conceptualize images, the other way is compartmentalization. So I'll take you backwards and show you. Axial means that's what it was, the exercises to the core. Okay, head, neck, torso. That's your axial. So by definition, head, neck, and trunk. Anything that protrudes from that, not just arms and legs, but the connectors, shoulder and hip, by definition, are part of the appendicular skeleton. Now, you're going to see when we do that, we do the same thing when we start studying the bones. We do the skull, the vertebrae, the ribs, your core. Okay? Everything else, whether it's the hip assembly, the shoulder assembly, whatever it is, arms and legs, fingers and toes, that's all appendicular. You need to compartmentalize it that way. Regional terms are fear, and we use them a lot. So you might have, told you, the medial collateral and lateral collateral ligament for the knee, and depending on, and you'll find with doctors and medical professionals, sports professionals, you use the language that you were trained with. So some say tibial or fibular collateral ligament. Some say ulnar or radial collateral ligament. They're talking about the elbow. It depends. So a lot of them are self-explanatory. So now you have two views. You have anterior and posterior. Okay. So, and the beauty of these terms is they give you extra bang for your buck. Frontal. Well, I know it's in the front. Frontal is your forehead. So you have a frontal bone. You have a frontal aspect. Underneath you have a frontal bone. You have a muscle on either side, unless you're sort of wrinkle your brow. Just get an IS, frontalis. What country? Not done yet. You have underneath it, you have the frontal lobe and the brain. Same thing in the back. Occipital bone. Okay, occipital region, occipitalis, helps it again, wrinkle your brow. Okay, looking from the back to the front. And you have the occipital region of the brain, the occipital lobe, which helps you process visual. You can't be happy if you got that on the temple. These are your temples. That part we call that the eyeglass business. Temporal, temporalis muscle, temporal lobe, parietal area, you know what that's meaning for bone, no muscles. Yeah, but there's parietal lobe. Orbital, there's no orbital lobe. Oh, terrible, hit by a pitch, he has an orbital fracture. That's across the wall. Cows don't have one, correct? Yeah, I knew that. My kids were in ice hockey every year. My boys play hockey. Here before Robert Morris. Not great. I had nothing to do with it. 3 children, I have no biological ties, all done. What? Yeah. No, well, I never played. We have a great course. I was in the township. Remember, my son when he could play, my oldest is good golf. He's ridiculously well. His legs were good. He was like born in high school. It's like drove that if you like golf, like the old course of St. Andrews, you drove to 10, well, 320 yards. We all played there. And so that's Andrews. What? That's Andrews. But they don't British. Yeah, 6 courses. I didn't pay for it. They got money. For those that don't know, and I know. My oldest, the one I'm talking about, played golf with, and his best friend, they were the best man at each other's weddings. Were are both career naval officers. My oldest is are you ready? Part of the library children. Is the commanding officer of guidance ship. Not yet. But Dan's flying. Dan is a chopper pilot in the desert, and now he's flying fixed wings out of somewhere outside Tokyo. So moving on. How did I do that even? Nurture, not nature. You don't believe me? You're terrible. Here. Just because I'm feeling, trust me, their accomplishments outshine mine, wherever they are. DDG 119. Okay. Leadership. Commanding officer, that means the guy is in charge. There we are. Wish he'd smile.
I don't think you're supposed to.
No, I don't think you're supposed to. Yeah. Duquesne and Pitt. All right. Listen, that's about what he looks like. My daughter's better looking. Thank God. Thank you. Who's that? I want to know who that is. That's my son. He's 40. I'm not 1,000 years old. My youngest grandchild's 22. That's my daughter's daughter. My daughter's 37. As I'm fond of saying, you do the math. She had her daughter before she was 16. And also fond of saying she wasn't the first and she won't be the last. Okay? Just saying. You have children. I mean, when you have children, if you don't. No, not making a comment. You don't want to. You're a headache. Other than periodically, you can say good things about them. All right? Moving on. So, back to what we were doing scientifically. So that's why he did all that stuff. Yeah. So moving on, this is where we were with regard to the regions. Orbital. There's no orbital fracture. There's no orbital bone. I beg your pardon. There's an orbital fracture. There are 7 bones that you all have to know that comprise the orbit. If one, but typically you'll see, like in hockey a lot, catch a puck under the mask, be an orbital fracture. It's more common than you would think. But you have to be bone specific. Nasal is the nose region. There's a nasal bone. That's up here. That's the bridge of your nose. Buccal means cheek. So you have buccinator is the name of these muscles. So typically buccal, oral is mouth. Okay. Ocular would be eye, another word for it. For whatever reason, I don't know what the derivation is. Mental is chin. Okay. I don't know what it is. It's just one of those just because it is. Okay. The same thing. This is called a nuchal, Nuchal region. Sort of where there's a structure called the ligamentum nuchae, a strong piece of connective tissue attachment for muscles and tendons. And so it's back here. It's rather important, but they call that the nuchal region. It's just one you have to remember. Cervical depends on the location. Cervical means neck. If we say uterine cervical, we're talking about the uterine cervical area between the vagina and the uterus, which is it's just the neck-like opening between those two anatomical structures. Okay, so it's not that difficult. Thorax, chest, cervical, thoracic, lumbar, low back, sacral. Okay, are all terms. Yeah, and if you're standing up for a likely reason, these chairs are awful. You can stand. You don't have to. If you want to walk around, walk around. If you want to move, if you feel like you got to take a break and you're tired of listening to me, I don't get offended. Okay, I'm not like that. I couldn't sit on these. I'd much rather be in the environmental science lab. It's a little more, comfortable. So hey, I'm happy you're here. Not that happy. Now we can talk about her. She's gone. I'm terrible. I am not.
I think you're a bully.
Oh God, you're listening to Chelsea.
No, I didn't listen to anything.
I don't blame you. It's all right. I have between her and Haley. It's just I'm in.
I know they told me.
Haley is reminiscent of my daughter. There's a lot. There could be. Help me. All right, sternal. Sternum is your breastbone. Sternal is that area. Mammary is associated with the breast. Axillary, the underarm. Abdominal area is generally from the divider is always the diaphragm. So from the diaphragm, effectively abdomen, when you get sort of below the umbilicus or belly button, now you're into the pelvic area, inguinal area, groin, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so all those terms are useful for that. Pubic region typically implies the genitalia. We will be a little more specific when we do male and female genitalia. Upper lip, the clavicle, which they don't have here for some reason. Okay, so that's your collarbone, most frequently fractured bone in the body. Surprises me. It joins the acromion, which is part of the scapula. Okay, so we frequently refer to the scapular region when we look back here and call it a shoulder blade. So the acromion and the clavicle come together. That's the acromioclavicular joint. That joint, even though it's on this particular skeleton, is somewhat different. So they're not wired together. This is a very this is where you separate your shoulder. If we had the upper extremity angle, this would that's the socket that is. So this is the acromioclavicular area. So you can say acromion process, coracoid process. There's different areas on the ankle. Clavicle has a sternal end and an acromion. They call them processes. A lot of times, process is just a particular aspect or protrusion. Normally, we see them with stuff attaches. pulls and tugs on the bone. And you're going to hear about something called wolf's claw when it gets bone. Bones are shaped by the forces. You pull and tug on a bone, it's big. You push on the bone, it creates an indentation. So you lay in the bone, you get a fossa. So I was talking about an lecture. The fossa is sort of like this hollow area, sometimes you can penetrate. All sorts of things. To me, it's fascinating. So the brachia, the arm, Bill, I call you. In the older terminology, it was brachius. You take a blood pressure, put a blood pressure up here, brachial artery. Okay. So, and to me, this is the forearm, but a lot of people, in the old days, ANTE means before, anti-brachial. You have radius and ulnar. So you have the radial area, the ulnar area, if you will. As you can see, olecranon it's not really, it's really be better on the back. Is that the bump of your elbow is called the olecranon process. And these are always very interesting. Anytime like the axilla or the cubital fossa or behind your knee, which is called the popliteal, there's a lot of good stuff that goes on there. That's like a passageway for muscles, nerves, blood vessels. It's very significant to understand. So as we get into the antebrachial form, carpal here, and the extremities are very similar. When we get to the foot and the ankle assembly, it's called tarsal. So you have carpal bones, which are small. You're still here at radius and ulnar. Carpal are a little bit more distal to that. And then when you get farther along from that, now you get beyond meta, beyond carpal area, and then phalanges, which are the digits. Same in the hand as the foot. Yeah. Four, we have three phalanges, usually the lesser digits, two. And the pollix, the thumb, two. Scott. So, and then we have the dorsal region of the hand, if you want to call it that. Palmar region will be here. Pollix, I usually use you in that. A word about PowerPoints, but at this time of your career, you should know about it. PowerPoints are not gospel. PowerPoints are not subject to editorial review. Textbook sends PowerPoints to graphic artists to make when the content of the chapter is sent or illustrations are sent to people like me or other educators to review them, and they get a little credit for the text. That's important today. Okay? That's editorial review. So it's a little bit, it's like submitting a paper. It's going to be published, it's under editorial review. To know that your research is valid, your resources are valid. It's not plagiarizable. So these are not. So, I mean, PowerPoints have errors all the time. I'll never. So, not just for me, I'm easy going with that. Go look at some other professors. Well, the PowerPoint said that. They might be good help. Moving on. Good. So the coxal area is the hip. The actual hip bone is called the os coxae. I call it hip bone. Femur, thigh, big bone, also the region. Patella, kneecap, popliteal behind it. Crural leg. There's fascia, dense connective, relatively dense connective tissue that sort of holds for mechanical advantage the muscles, both in the upper extremity and the lower extremity. That fascia is important. For athletes, they occasionally get something called compartment syndrome, which ain't fun. Okay? And you have to incise that, basically give the muscles room to expand. Sural is calf, there's a sural nerve. Okay? And peroneal is old. It was confusing because the perineum, perineal, is the anogenital area, where the peroneal meant calf. So now they changed names. We used to have muscles called peroneus brevis, longus, and tertius. Now we call them fibularis longus, brevis, and tertius. When I learned about them, they were peroneus, but it was confusing. And a lot of times when we see subtle changes in anatomy, it's to eliminate confusion from the anatomical terminology. So I learned those terms, oh God, 50 years ago. So Oh, come on. To think I have that kind of memory where I remember it like it was yesterday. It's a gift. My dad had it. Okay. So my best friend, same age as I am, I said, remember when we did that? He goes, no. I mean, we went there. We were there. I go, no. It probably has to do with all that stuff we were inhaling back in 1969 to 75. I'm just saying, the statute of limitations has expired. And it's legal in most states. You know, Woodstock that summer, all that. You heard about that? If you get MGM Plus, which used to be called Epics, there's a couple of really good shows on that are done very interestingly on the sort of the development of that music in that area. One's called Laurel Canyon, has a lot to do with Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, two-part, and the other one is about A&M Records. One of the founders just died, nearly 90 years old. Just wonderful artists. Very interesting. You like that kind of stuff. Moving on. So again, when we get down to the foot area, tarsal is the ankle. Your heel is called the calcaneus, so the heel region is calcaneal, and then metatarsals and digits, just like we had before. Plantar, bottom of the foot. Palmar, sort of that portion of the hand. Same thing here. Otic would be ear. Occipital we talked about. Cervical we talked about. Scapular, you and I refer to as a shoulder blade area. That's called the spine. A sharp edge prominence of bone is referred to as the spine. Lumbar for low back, the part where it's indented, thickest portion of the bones. Sacral, farther down in between the gluteal area. Again, that's your rear end. Perineum, again, the anogenital area. Acromion, we mentioned, olecranon, etc. All of those terms we covered. Okay? Body planes, covered. We call them, I mentioned this for the sake of completeness. When I say sagittal plane, it's mid-sagittal or mid-frontal, unless I specify it. But you can take these ones that are divided, and they're important. Okay? You'll see I'll show you the planes in a second. Because of oblique sections and slices like that. I use the term slices advisedly. So, why are these relevant? Right here. This is when nowadays we do scans for everything. Within the last 2 months, I had an abdominal CT scan, okay, for basically to address I share it with everybody. So it's not news to anybody. I had bladder cancer 7 or 8 years ago that I've recovered from. There's still problems aftermath wise that involve that. This is one because of the development of may have been bladder stones, so something they had to check on that are there. When you have a scan with contrast, okay, and contrast means some type of a dye that will set off or highlight certain areas. Today we do that all the time with MRIs or functional MRIs, PET scans, which is positron emission scans. It's a fascinating area. This is all what's collectively advanced imaging. So, and CT stands for computerized tomography. The original term was CAT for computerized axial tomography. And what originally tomograms where you have someone like this and you take a slide, you have a 40 degree and a 45 and a 50 and a 55, and you look at them sequentially. Now, with computer technology, we can take those views and create something. The same with an MRI. Yeah, exactly. Just like that. So all of those scans, and you're showing MRIs. In general, MRIs are better for soft tissue, and CTs are better for harder tissue. And we use a combination of both, and they're fascinating.
CTs are just X-rays, right?
CTs are, yeah, your exposure to radiation CTs are radiographic, so you're getting exposed to radiation. Ostensibly, barring metal in your body that could be yanked around, MRIs don't do that. MRIs, I think everybody would know, stands for magnetic resonance imaging. a little historical note. When I transferred from my first undergraduate school, which was Lehigh University over in Bethlehem, PA, to Seton Hall University, not Seton Hill here, but Seton Hall in South Orange, New Jersey, as a chemistry major, which I graduated with, I was basically I was running the MRI machine. The original machine was used for organic analysis. And we basically have a device that does all those things for Dr. Badger. We can do MRIs, and I don't know if we have the MRI actually, maybe we do. He has the GLC, gas liquid mass spectrometry stuff, and we would identify unknowns. And the MRI basically would spin in a magnetic area, dissolve the material, and use it for a qualitative organic analysis to find out what it was. Okay, basically, we use it for identifying unknowns. They took that technology as the computer age came upon us and created MRI technology. I mean, that's the history of it. I was doing them without, there was no such thing as an MRI back when I started doing those in 1971. So here, so when you're doing a chest x-ray, that's kind of the view they get. AP chest. And so here's a cross section. See, and with cross sections, you can kind of tell where it is based on the structure. So lumbar vertebrae, the gastrointestinal, maybe you're seeing some spleen and pancreas. Here, from a side view, and they're just showing it. You can look at those at your leisure. We're almost done with this PowerPoint. We'll start the other one and be out of here, hopefully relatively expeditiously thereafter. You want a break, or you want to just get it the heck done? Go with it. I know. I have to keep my voice going. The rate determining step is my voice. Okay. Internal cavities. You got two. Everybody, you got two cavities. You have the dorsal body cavity. We're not talking about teeth. The cranial cavity and the vertebral cavity are small dorsal. They contain one thing: central nervous system, brain, spinal cord. Period. The ventral cavities are divided into the thoracic and abdominopelvic. There's no divide here. The pelvic cavity is in the pelvic area below the iliac crest at the top of the hip assembly. So everything, and by definition, we see mostly liver, gastrointestinal, spleen, pancreas. Here, by definition, more reproductive excretory structures. Thoracic, heart, lungs, pretty much. Diaphragm is and so this is subdivided. This is really important. We'll get to this anatomically. These are closed spaces. The heart, you have three basic sections. Two of them are closed. You have one on the right and one on the left, plural, pleural cavities. They contain the lungs. That way, if one lung is damaged, if one lung collapses, both do not necessarily collapse. Well, let's say a bad accident where someone gets hit here, or a projectile. Okay, so you'll have a phenomenon because air gets in and collapses the lung called atelectasis. You're still able to breathe for a period of time until you can put a test tube in and reinflate the lung, because if you don't, that lung can be permanently damaged. So you have those two. Now you have an area in the middle called the mediastinum. Superiorly, it's got the end of the trachea and the start of some important structures in here. The lower half is another cavity called the pericardia for around, peri for around, cardia for heart. Another cavity. The abdominal pelvic does not have all that elaborate structure. So you can see the subdivisions and what they are. You can do that as well as I can. What's in there? So, and whenever something goes where it shouldn't, we call it herniation. And we'll look at this in gastrointestinal. Classically, when it pushes up, hiatal hernia, the area where the esophagus penetrates the diaphragm, is called the abdominal hiatus, hence the name hiatal. A sports hernia is lower. Umbilical hernia or a surgical hernia is more anteriorly placed. That type of thing. Depending on the severity, it may require a procedure to be done. Okay. They're covered, and I talked about it a little bit, these thin, they have that simple squamous, which we're going to get to, lining tissue that's moist so structures can move over one another. And a little bit of surface tension in the moisture is important. It actually helps you to breathe because it expands your lung. And the way the lung works is very simple physiologically. It's my favorite chemistry is the easiest one to remember, the ideal gas law. Good old PV equals nRT. Love it. Everything's off of that. An old chemistry book. So they call it serosa if it's moist. When it gets dense and solid and dry, you'll see the name adventitia. So serous fluid, by definition, is not particularly sticky. It's mostly water with a little bit of other stuff in there that are there. It's around the heart, pericardia, the lungs, and so it has different names. In the abdomen, very famously, peritoneum. Heart, pericardium, lungs, pleural. And there's typically one on the wall, okay, and you'll see this again when we do the heart. The lining that's on the heart itself, like your fist if you pushed it into a balloon, is called visceral. Visceral means around the organ. So if it's around me, visceral. If it's on the wall that I might rub against, parietal. And that's going to become important down the road. So, and you can have problems if it gets sticky. In medicine, we use quadrants. That's what I use. So, and you basically make 4 quadrants from the xiphoid through the umbilicus, and at the umbilicus at 90 degrees, right upper quadrant. So the structures that are in there. If someone has gallbladder problems, very often right upper quadrant. Here's the appendix, left lower quadrant. You might have intestinal. If you ask, think of the next 10 times someone tells you they have a stomach ache, ask them where it hurts. They'll probably point to 10 different areas. It's very hard you don't get a lot of message to your brain about specifics. You have abdominal discomfort, it's in different areas. In classic anatomy, they use tic-tac-toe, all these regions. So it's around the umbilicus, they call it the umbilical region, and then imagine dividing it this way. So, and this is what anatomists use. To me, it's busy work. I don't use it. So hypochondriac means, chondral means cartilage. These are under the rib cartilages on the left and right. These are, as you can see, these are lumbar, and then you have inguinal region that's here in pubic region. So, and then there's other cavities that we'll get to as we do it. These are exposed, your mouth, your nose, your ear, even the middle ear, because your eustachian tube opens into the back of behind your nose, into the back of your throat. So technically stuff can get in there, and frequently does. When you think of babies with ear infections. Synovial cavities are joint cavities, elbow and knee. They're not exposed. When an infection gets in there, man, something got in there either that was in the system or in the bloodstream. That's a problem. The most frequent cause of synovial infections in adults, gonorrhea. Has a predilection. We don't see as much gonorrhea as we did when I was a resident, when it was running rampant. Every day in the emergency room, we had 2 or 3 people with gonorrhea and syphilis. Well, how's that? That was, how long did it take? Not even an hour. Another half an hour, I know. I can see why you're rooming with her.
Why?
You're both the same. What? Is it just the 2 of you?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Thank goodness. She's rooming with somebody. With Chelsea. You know Chelsea? Yeah, too bad. It's okay. She's from North Hills. She's okay. She's wonderful. She's wonderful. My stepkids all went to Seneca Valley. My kids were all Fox Chapel. They went to. Here we are. There are 2 parts of chapter 4. It is about tissues. Remember, tissues are groups of similar cells, depending, and we can ascertain their function anatomically from their appearance and their location. So we group them Similarly, we are going to focus today on lining tissues or covering tissues. Know now that epithelial tissues are extraordinarily rapidly reproductive. We replace them in your stomach, you as adults, in your intestines and your stomach. Every one of those cells is replaced every 3 to 6 days. You have a whole new set of lining tissue every 3 to 6 days. It's a lot, billions of cells every day. Anything, when you talk about what goes wrong, what goes wrong in reproduction and mitosis ends up in one big problem. It's a very famous name called cancer. Okay? Whenever you see carcinoma, so the most common carcinomas that we see, by far and away, breast and prostate. They're known as adenocarcinomas, glandular lining cells. The numbers are staggering. Staggering. So when we hear the term sarcoma, less frequently, that involves connective tissue. We don't see it in muscle or nervous tissue other than extraordinarily rarely. Very important. I do a lot on that in particular, not just because I had bladder cancer, because it's a diagnosis that rears its head all the time. Okay? Mine had a very simple explanation for why I got it. Very easy. When it comes to bladder cancer, 99% of the cases have one thing in common: cigarette smoking. Now, I don't think none of you look to be 40. But she's not here. Forgive me. Gotta have fun. I smoked 2 packs a day for 40 years. That's 40. I haven't had a cigarette in 15 years. That's worth that. June 20th, which would have been my parents' anniversary, was the day. So 15 years ago, that's why I'm able to give you this lecture. Moving on. So this just gives you an idea of where the tissues are. Not a big deal. This is how they're prepared. We're not doing that. But most of the time, we're going to see either light microscopy or electron microscopy to see them. This is an important word, artifacts. It's like sometimes you'll see something that looks like it's something it's really not. It has to do with the process, the staining, the photography, how the image is put together. You like, did you have to go?
No.
Oh, okay. I thought if you, I'm not just picking on you. I don't have a problem with recording. You know, like I said, if you have a sporting event or it's fine with me. So take a look. So you have the distinctions when you have transmission, which gives you more detail, scanning where the beam comes in at an angle. You might have covered that in micro and lab. Hopefully you did. I used to do a lot of micro labs, not so much anymore. So it's, for lack of a better term, it's a sheet. The beauty of epithelial cells is they're attached to each other, and they're attached both to each other, not in one direction, but in all directions. So a sheet is a very good word. So they're on every external surface, your skin. You'll learn, because then we go right to skin after this in lab. You have 3 layers of your skin. Today, they're different than they were when I learned about it. You had epidermis, dermis, and subcutaneous, the fatty layer. That is not really a skin layer. Okay, now you have epidermis outside the dermis, and you have the superficial and the deep dermis. Those are the 3 layers classically. So skin is an external covering. Every opening, every tube is lined. Okay, and so they're really important because they allow stuff, or sometimes they don't allow stuff. Sometimes they're for protection. Every gland, whether it's that breast or prostate, or a sweat gland or a sebaceous gland, which is part of every single hair follicle, those are all areas where there can be problems. So they do everything. They're thick, they protect. They absorb they filter. You'll see that in the kidney. They excrete, like perspiration. Okay? They secrete, depending on, let's say, It's a pituitary gland. We get into endocrine. And there's tiny little receptors that you'll see in the skin, which have a great name. They're called Merkel cells, that are one of the 4 types of epithelial cells when we get to skin. And so we look at them, and what's neat about that, and again, I'm a terrible artist, but they're attached to one another. It's discern some of the function, as you will see. So the all lining cells, underneath them, they have, which you're going to learn about, it's called loose areolar, which means airy, connective tissue. Okay. Because they don't have any direct blood supply. Everything they get is from one of my favorites, all stuff that's in there. And then you'll typically see, and I think of that as one isolated unit, even though it's a big sheet. And they're all not only connected at the base, but they're connected to each other. And depending on the nature of the connections and how many there are, and this goes back to your regular cell stuff. You have different things that connect. Principally, tight junctions and desmosomes. Ringing a bell? Desmosomes are strong, tight junctions mean watertight. So the more tight junctions you have, the more likely it's not going to allow water-soluble things to permeate. So we learn about something called the blood-brain barrier. Why it's hard for things to traverse the bloodstream into your brain. Like if you're taking a medication for an infection in your brain, actually one of the course has been formulated in such a way that makes it more fat soluble. It's all about barriers. That's more physiology, but it gives you an idea. So they have specialized contacts, some of those supported underneath by connective tissue, avascular, but they do have a nerve supply, and they regenerate, like I said, like crazy. Polarity, a top and a bottom. So you have a surface that's sticking out, that's called the apical surface. It's right the apex. So apex here, and it's the name apical. Base here, that's the name basal. And the most common skin cancer is a basal. So apical and apical surfaces are smooth. We'll get to ones that increase surface area. Your body works by these adaptations. They have surface area. Your stomach, your small, particularly your small and large intestine, the cells are covered in what are called microvilli. They look kind of like those little finger-like projections, like that, mini fingers. It's a little surface area. You create a brush border so that your small intestine, you took it out, it's like a garden hose, about an inch thick garden hose, about 20 feet. Slice it, and you see the surface area. But you spread it out, you leave outside the pencil. In regards to the actual surface area, those are adaptations. So it works like crazy. Basal surface faces inward, and it attaches to a base plate, this sort of sheet of tissue, and then underlying it. And we can identify, based on the size and shape of the cells, what all they do. So here you can see, here's a layer. You can see these cells are somewhat elongated. These would be columnar. This is typically a gut. The little brush border, even though it's not well magnified there, would be here. So this is something you would see somewhere in small intestine, large intestine, etc. So again, tight junctions and desmosomes, depending on what they do. You're going to see desmosomes are about tensile strength, tight junctions, water tone. Connective tissue, they have layers that are underneath that base layer, collagen fibers, reinforcing it, tearing, stretching, effectively creating boundaries. The big thing what cancers do is they don't acknowledge boundaries, they invade. They're hungry. They're looking for the next meal. And it doesn't matter what they go through. And that's one of the ways we determine between, if we talk about a venereal wart, HPV, which most cervical cancers are secondary to that. A typical wart versus an atypical wart has to do with what we see as structures that are encapsulated. They have a distinct boundary. It may create pressure, but it's not irregular. Once we start to see irregularity microscopically in a pathology lab after you take a specimen out, and we do that all the time, it's called biopsy. So that's something I used to do that all the time. You'd have, like I have something on the skin, and let's say it was a mole. Let's take it out. Take out the mole, and that's pretty easy to close. You just stitch here and stitch here. But in healthy, you always put the interface healthy. That's where bad stuff happens. And sometimes they'll do a new small punch. You have like a sterile hole puncher. Just big enough to go around it and pop. Haven't cut on anybody intentionally in 22 years. Okay.
You said intentionally?
Intentionally. I get, all of a sudden you're doing something at home, and you leave something out that's sharp, like my wife will yell at me like a broken glass. I cut my foot. I'm sorry. I thought I cleaned everything up. That's unintentional. I live in a permanent state of being yelled at. That's all right. It is indigenous to husbands. Not married? Yeah. I give you the same advice my dad gave me. Stay single like your old man. I listen. No blood vessels, nourished, etc. Regenerative, talked about. It depends. So if you think of swallowing something, you can imagine as food's passing, you're going to have to replace those cells. They may have limited, maybe something that's relatively abrasive. Think of the instances where that could happen, that you are there. So they're either a single layer, as I have drawn. We call that simple. Simple means single. If it's more than one layer, it's called stratified. 2 or 62, stratified. Doesn't matter. Once you start to see multiple layers, think protective. The second name indicates the shape of the outermost, if it's one layer, the shape, or if it's the outermost layer, the shape, if it's multiple cells, the outermost layer is the definition, as you will see. The name is not just for the shape of the cell, but also for the shape of the nucleus. The nucleus has different shapes, whether it is squamous, which technically means shingled, but to me, squished would be the best way to describe it, or squashed. Cuboidal, okay, because it's like a cube, sort of equal size, or columnar, like I was showing you before. In multiple layers, particularly with the skin, is a classic example of stratified squamous. Only the outermost layer is that flattened area. And you're going to see there's two distinctions. Your skin on the exterior is keratinized, it's dead on the outside. In your mouth, it's not. It's called non-keratinized squamous. So in openings to your mouth, your nose, anogenitally, those are non-keratinizing squamous. What makes the difference? Blood supply. Because as the layers grow, they're kind of like being pushed from the bottom out. So it's like building a wall, but you're not putting the bricks on top of the wall. It's like you're lifting up the first layer and putting a new layer under it. So you're pushing it away from your blood supply. You get far enough from your blood supply, your nourishment, cells start to die. Taking the dirt, dead, more, sleeping with the fishes. Godfather? See, you and I are from New Jersey. We can relate.
How you know I'm from New Jersey?
I know him.
Oh,
Are you also?
yeah, I'm from Jersey City.
Really? Cool. See, Hudson County, Was Raritan County? Middlesex County. And I'm Union County. I was born in Essex County. I didn't know that. A Jersey City guy. Okay. So, like anybody, I joked with Dr. Hillwood today. When I grew up in a community, everybody had moved out of the city. It was either Jewish or Italian. So a lot of guys would go up to us and say, "Hey, what's your father do?" So don't ask. So in New Jersey, we don't ask because they could be connected.
Garbage disposal.
What? Yeah, exactly. The Sopranos.
Yeah.
They filmed The Sopranos. Right? It was like old home week. For anybody follow The Sopranos other than this gentleman here?
Yes.
Is it making it? Here's a little bit of trivia. A girl who was a year ahead of me in high school actually had a recurring role on The Sopranos and was in the production team. She had done a lot of not A-grade movies, but she was the female lead with Chuck Norris and Burt Reynolds. Her name is on the tip of my tongue. Oh, it'll come to me. Like that. She was actually in that. It had that. Her name was Tony Kalem, Kalem. So she would be your old enough. So she'd be 73 now. She was on the. She played a recurrent character. I think she wrote one of the episodes. That whole team was out of Rutgers for the most part. Yeah, like Gandolfini. A lot of those people were out of Rutgers. So back to New Jersey roots. So stratified epithelium. So here's the difference. See, in stratified squamous, you see how it starts cuboidal, sometimes columnar, and by the time it gets here, it flattens out. Okay, this is simple squamous. Squamous, the nucleus flattened. It's like a fried egg. It has It has a nucleus in the center that's disproportionately small compared to the surface area. What does all that surface area give you? A lot of membrane to move things in and out. Think of the lung. What's happening in the lung? Oxygen, carbon dioxide. You need a lot of membrane for that to occur. That's where you see it. Cuboidal, once you get thicker, more production, secretion or processing, absorption. Columnar, even a greater amount. So the shape, again, relationship between form and function. That's what this is all about. Okay, so simple, flattened laterally, not a lot of cytoplasm, kidneys and lungs. In the kidney, it's a little bit different because there's bigger openings in those tight junctions and little holes that allow filtration to occur. Lining of blood vessels, and mesothelium is like on the outer area of intestines. Here it's within the vessels, again, for that smooth thing. I'll do it again because I love doing it. So this is lung. A lot of air, a lot of cells. That's healthy lung. Okay? Why is it healthy? You don't see sclerotic, hard, thickened areas. You don't see extraordinarily wide areas without a lot of membrane. That's something you might likely see with emphysema. What does emphysema mean? It's not confined to the lung. Emphysema means trapped air. So when someone has gas gangrene, whether you covered that or not in micro or not, trapped air is one of the giveaways for that. That flesh-eating bacteria, necrotizing fasciitis, of which I've seen 2 cases clinically. Trapped air. Cuboidal. Glands, kidney tubules, a lot. Okay, this is kidney. Okay, it has a lumen, that's the inner area, it's clear, and you can see the circular nucleus, and it's like it's surrounding. So this is a tube with a hole in it, and the lining cells, and as this liquid is going through, it's grabbing onto sodium, it's getting rid of waste products, it's grabbing onto chloride, it's getting rid of some other waste product. That's what it's doing, it's going through those tubes. Processing, what we call filtrate, reclaiming a lot of the liquid, and what you end up with is what we call urine. Because the main constituent that makes it urine is a chemical called urea. And urea comes mostly from amino acids that we've utilized in protein metabolism when we haven't used the proteins. And reform them as more proteins. is we take those nitrogens, those ammonias, and we staple them onto carbon dioxide, and we make a chemical called urea, which is easier to dispose. So columnar, tall, closely packed. Some have adaptations. Microvilli surface. Remember, these are eukaryotic cells. The membrane, even those appendages, it's not like a bacterial flagella. It's got membrane around it. So it's an internal protein appendage that's sheathed in membrane. Cilia are the same way. Cilia just sweep. They're like oarsmen, okay, like in a rowboat, rowing together. Yeah. I'm thinking Vikings. Yeah. Ramming speeds, 10 Commandments, Charlton Heston. I'm also a very big fan of Wizard of Oz.
Why?
Why not? I love Judy Garland.
Oh,
One of the great voices of all time. Terribly mistreated by the system. They addicted her to pills and drugs. Well, they had to go to school. They were like 12 hours on set. They started, and that amphetamines had just been really identified and synthesized. They started giving her that. She couldn't sleep. They gave her sleeping pills. They turned her into a drug addict. They didn't want her to eat because she's supposed to play a skinny Dorothy. They had to pad everything down because she wasn't skinny and she was more developed than the original cast, which would have had Shirley Temple.
You know, she likes cigarettes very.
Yeah, oh yeah, she's crazy. Yeah, but the voice alone, fabulous, fabulous. I'm also a cowardly lion kind of a fan. Go ahead. I'll beat you with my tail tied behind my back. Go ahead.
how many times do you watch?
It's 1,000 times. I have children and grandchildren. There's a lot of Wizard of Oz in me.
Watch it with
Pardon me?
Did you watch it with the dark side of it?
No, I did not. The Dark Side, another story with that. Very interesting album. You know what we're talking about? The album's called Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon. That album was in the top 100 for what, 20 plus years?
Something like that.
My buddy and I, when it first came out, we went to every record store in northern New Jersey looking for that the day it came out.
Sold out.
Yeah, boom. Couldn't get it. I mean, so moving on. Yeah, we did it with records. They had vinyl, played it. Just saying. So a lot of these, when you see columnar, they typically secrete mucus. Okay, they're in two areas particularly: respiratory, one type, and in the gut, another type. The mucus plays a pivotal role. In respiratory, it traps particles that we can expel or swallow. Okay, in the cilia, you beat it up towards your mouth so you can do one or the other. In the gut, that same mucus is protective in nature. It can be either acidic or alkaline because those regions are under pH control. The stomach very acidic, the small intestine very alkaline. Okay, it's interesting. There's a genetic disease, if you haven't had genetics, which you probably have learned about already, that affects mucus, and we see them, those babies with problems respiratorily and digestive. The name of that disease is cystic fibrosis. You're 2 for 2 today. Cystic fibrosis. You make the diagnosis by if they have that. My middle one, who's now 39, had that problem, and they did a thing called the chloride sweat test because there would be an abnormal concentration of chlorine. So they used methylene. They put a little device, strapped it on, ran it like heat to generate perspiration, and then had methylene blue as a dye. So they collected and tested. And then I don't know what they do today. I mean, there's genetic testing. This is 40 years ago. You had that done over at Mercy Hospital. So you can see all of these areas that are there. This is simple columnar. You can see the brush border. That's gastrointestinal. A warning now, everybody. I know we're getting near the end of it's a long day. I'm a nut for epithelial. I have epithelial questions on every test. I love this stuff. This is a goblet cell because it's narrow and it's with the goblet open at the top. Okay. With the amusing red wine. I joke about it, I don't drink. Pseudo-stratified, meaning it looks like it's in multiple layers, it's not. Because every cell, even though they vary in height, they all go down to the base membrane. They are cilia. We see this in respiratory all over the place, some other areas, large glands and tubules, etc. Cilia like that. So if you look at all these cells, even the ones that don't go to the top, go down to the base. That's what pseudo-stratified means. So stratified, there's really stratified, squamous, and transitional. Those are the ones you have to know. The stratified columnar and cuboidal are sufficiently rare. Sometimes where a gland starts, like a sweat gland or a sebaceous gland, we will see that. Sometimes in testes or ovaries, we will see that, but they're comparatively rare. So again, basal cells divide and go toward the surface. So it's dividing with mitosis, and the new cell is down, and the existing cells are being pushed away, hence changing as they move away from their blood supply. Stratified squamous, and the outermost area, because it flattens, call it stratified squamous. The free surface, the deeper or cuboidal or columnar, all when it's stratified, it's all about wear and tear, protective. Keratinized in the skin, non-keratinized in what we call moist or mucous linings. This would be your mouth. Okay, pharyngeal area, entry area. You can see, you'll eventually see there's a series of ridges and pegs. And this is where the connective tissue and the blood supply. These are the more or less columnar or cuboidal. And you see what as they grow away from their blood supply, they begin to change and flatten, but they're nucleated all the way at the end. Maybe you did this in micro, I used to with mine. We take a sterile cotton tip and swab the inside of your mouth and make a smear and methylene blue it so you could, and it's like when they do DNA testing. You know, they'll just get a swab or something forensically. So, because they're constantly shedding. Versus when we get to keratinized, when we look at skin, the outer area is hard. So cuboidal and columnar are very limited areas, not a big deal for us. Why is this one important? This is where my cancer was. Transitional is located in the ureters, the bladder, and in the beginning of the urethra. The urethra then eventually becomes stratified squamous, non-keratinized. So it's in limited areas, and it's optical illusion. When your bladder is full with fluid, it pushes the cell toward the base. So it looks like it has 2 or 3 layers. When your bladder or the ureters are empty, they expand to maybe 7 to 12 layers. And so the changing shape gives it just, and a lot of things are optical illusions. And we are highlighted by this. So you can see the base layers, and as it begins to grow away, you can see they're rounded. So when you see these with the empty bladder or ureters, you see this. So this is called transitional epithelium. Why I was fortunate when it was discovered, it had not gone deeper. Once it gets deeper, you got problems. Okay. Fortunately, the bladder is a natural, muscles are barriers like the diaphragm. When we talk about stage 4 cancer, it means it's a cancer that's crossed the diaphragm. Same thing, when anything is protected by muscle, like a bladder, is contained in there, we have a much better chance of fighting. Well, glands we look at, our focus in this chapter is exocrine, sweat glands. They're the only one that's unicellular is that goblet cell in the lungs, in the respiratory or digestive. Multicellular, and there's so many nuances. If you're going to go on to graduate or medical or PA school, you learn about this stuff because there's different structures. They're called tubular and acinar. Endocrine glands, we do a separate chapter on in physiology, not in anatomy, has blood vessels surrounding it, and it's like a sponge. The stuff secretes out, and the blood vessels, the capillary bed surrounds it, sucks it up right in the bloodstream. These you have an invaginated epithelial that's indented, kind of rounds out and starts to produce. So we'll do endocrines another time. Exocrine into body cavities, like your pancreas is a double duty gland. It's endocrine for insulin and glucagon, and it's exocrine for digestive enzymes and digestive juices that allow you to process and finally absorb. There are a lot more of them than endocrine. So mucus, sweat, sebum or oil, salivary gland, single cell, the goblet cell, multicellular, and the mucin is like a sugar protein. And depending on how much it is, it gets more and more sticky, more and more, for lack of a better term, viscous. Here's a very good illustration of a micrograph with a goblet cell, and you get an idea of what's going on with it. And these other ones, it all depends. These exocrine glands are, and we're almost done, I know. Simple or compound, tubular or acinar. I'm not going to show you all that. Yeah. Be happy you don't have to do anything of that to know those. I'm not going to give you an illustration. Which one's compound, tubulo, alveolar? Don't care. Okay. How they secrete, I care. So, there are three types. There are some people who think that these don't exist. I'm not one. To me, it's not controversial. Okay, so you have a typical gland and you have cells. I'll just draw them generically. If it's secreting little droplets, that's typical of sweat gland. That's called merocrine, and some others call it ectron. Those are typical sweat glands. There are other examples where the distinction of what makes it apocrine stands for the apex of this. Here's the same group of cells. What is shed is a little piece of the cell, along with something. So the apex of the cell is how it gets named apocrine. Most of us believe that this is, we see this during lactation, and we see this with glands that develop in adolescence. So both axillary and anogenital rhythms. We think that that's where they come from. Sometimes there's a certain from the body odor, which is not necessarily hygienic, but it could be. Sometimes it's genetically based, and things like that. And then lastly, you get holocrine glands where it's effectively a new cell is produced, and the whole cell comes to secretion, and it's hollow. So you have apocrine, just the apex, merocrine, just the byproduct, etc. So those are the distinctions between that. So I mean, unless the science has changed dramatically. So here's merocrine. Here are the fragments. It's, to me, holocrine was not just. This would be more like apical. Holocrine, whole cell. So a typical sebaceous gland, like we have. And so why some of you have oily hair versus dry hair? Probably genetically based. Thank you very much for putting up with my bad humor for an hour and a half. Even I'm tired of listening.